I received a text message from a friend the other day about a PW50. He couldn't get it to run. He changed the spark plug, he cleaned out the carburetor, and he checked the air filter, and he replaced the gas. And he's like, I don't know what else to do. Can you help? So today, let's dig into this and see if we can get this PW50 to run better. So I'm not even sure what year this PW is because they're all pretty much the same going back to the late 80s or so. But my buddy did tell me he cleaned the carburetor, but he couldn't get the whole thing off. So 9 times out of 10, when a little 50 like this won't start, it's because the carburetor has some junk in it. Without a fuel filter, these little carburetors get clogged up pretty quick. If somebody says they cleaned it, chances are it just needs to be cleaned again, blown through, more thorough job. So that's where I'm going to start, is by taking that carburetor off, making sure it's nice and clean. Truthfully, I have never worked on a PW50, so I'm a little curious to see how this thing's put together. This is a very common bike to start little kids out on because of the fact that there's one speed. It's a centrifugal clutch, shaft drive, so you have less maintenance than you would if it were a chain-driven bike. They're lightweight, and they're just generally easy to ride for a young kid. I started my kids out on a CRF50 and a TTR50, and in hindsight, I really wish I had started them out on a PW instead because of the simplicity, the lack of gears, and things like that. This is the carburetor. Now we can see it. You got a little air box, you got a basic carburetor. It's not really a whole lot holding this carb on. The air box appears to just be that clamp and one single screw. So let's take the air box off first. Alright, air box is out. Oh, but I can already see. Let's see if I can get a good view of it. See the yellow gunk right there? That means the carburetor's dirty. That's a very, very strong indicator of a dirty carb. Next, I'm going to take off the main fuel line. Before you do this, make sure that the petcock is turned off. Otherwise, you will have all of your fuel just spilling out everywhere. There will be some fuel in the line, obviously. The engine side of the carburetor. There's a screw. There's a small nut on the back of that screw, just for a clamp. I'm not going to remove it, just I'm going to loosen it so I can pull it out. Then I'm actually going to take off the carb cables too. Throttle cables on the top. These cables operate the little slide. And, oh, it's not a push-pull. It's a single throttle cable, and then this is the choke cable. Cool, okay. But I'm seeing right here on this needle, I hope I can zoom in on the camera, there's residue on the needle anyway. That's what controls how much fuel is going in through the carburetor. So if this is clogged up, it's creating extra resistance, and that's not a good sign either. I feel bad saying this about my buddy, but he said he cleaned this carburetor. It does not look very clean. So I'm now 99% sure this is the problem. And with that, ooh, what is this little box? What is this? So I mentioned I've never worked on PWs. There is what appears to be a cable going from the carburetor to a little box back here. Oh, this is for the oil pump. It is an oil injected bike, so up here you have a little reservoir for the two-stroke oil, because this is a two-stroke engine. That feeds to the pump, which then puts in the oil as it's being sucked in. So I need to see if I can find a way to take this tube out so we can pull the whole carburetor off. So on this oil line, this little clip slides off, and this is just a hose attached to a basic brass nipple. So I twisted it a little bit to break it loose. I'm using this screwdriver to gently pull it back off of the nub. So the brass nipple came out with the hose. That's not usually how it's supposed to happen. So I'm going to take the brass piece out of the hose, hopefully without damaging it, because that's supposed to be pressed into the carburetor. That really shouldn't come out of the carburetor. I was able to get the barb out. It is just a little barb. That hose goes onto that and then is pressed on with that clamp. I clean my carburetor by soaking it in a parts cleaner, just a gallon container like this. Super easy, and then I blow through it, and if there's any issues, I've got little brushes to go through. But this does a pretty good job, but we can't just dump this whole thing in there. There's too much plastic and rubber in it. So the next thing we have to do is disassemble the carburetor, make sure we've got all the right pieces getting cleaned. first thing we're going to do, pull off the hose. Oh, one thing to note too, there is fuel in this, obviously. You can dump it upside down if you've got any type of rags. That way when you take off the bowl, it doesn't just go everywhere. You keep it contained to where you want it to go. In this carburetor, you have a little plastic piece right here, which should come out just by pulling up on it. You don't want to go too fast and break it. And get a smaller screwdriver. No, I got it. There we go. Okay. And then inside of this is a rubber gasket. Rubber gaskets do not like a carb cleaner. They will fall apart very, very quickly. Take note of the direction too. The flat side goes down. There are a couple screws on the side. You've got your air idle mix and then you've got your idle controller. I'm going to take those out just because there's sometimes rubber pieces on these. Again, I don't want the rubber to get degraded inside of the cleaner. There's nothing on the main idle screw. I'm not going to count these because I'm going to reset these when I put it back together. But when you're taking it apart, if you have settings that you know you like, you can tighten it in, count the number of turns you have in until it stops, and then back it all the way out. And then you know how many turns out it was from where you liked it. Now we'll take off the bottom bowl. When you're doing this, please push down with a lot of force. These screws tend to strip out pretty easily, so make sure you use the right size screwdriver and you're pushing down as you turn. Do not use a drill, do not use an impact driver. Those will likely strip these out. Who wants to take bets that the inside looks like the outside of this? Yellowed, grimy, and just gross. Ugh. I mean, I've seen worse, but that's pretty gross. Yeah. It's not really solid residue, but there's definitely stuff in there. So the float is held on with this little pin right here. There's a pin that goes through. You can push that out to something small. If you can, get it to a point where you can get your fingers or a small pair of pliers on it, and you can pull it out. The little pin that just came out is your float needle. Do not put this in the carb cleaner because this has a rubber tip, and as I said, rubber will degrade. But you want to look for to see if there's any lines or cuts on the rubber tip. This is what stops the fuel flow from coming in. As the float raises, it pushes this down right here, and it stops the flow into the carburetor. So if this tip is damaged, replace it. You can get a carb rebuild kit that has all the new jets and gaskets and the needle valve for fairly inexpensive. I'll find one on Amazon and I'll link it below. That way if you want to just replace them, you can, but I'm going to try to clean them and salvage what we've got. With the flashlight, I don't know if I can get the GoPro to really show it, but this main jet is completely clogged. I can see actual dust and dimension on the stuff that's in it. Definitely need to pull that out and clean it. You've got the main jet here, you've got the idle jet here, and then we're going to clean the whole carb body and the stuff too, but we got to remove the gasket because we can't put that gasket in the cleaner. Be gentle with this gasket. You don't want to tear it or damage it as you try to pull it out. Again, if you do, you can get a replacement for fairly inexpensive, but I'm trying to save as much as I can and keep this as low cost as possible. It's probably better to replace this, but it's not torn, it's not ripped. The main jet is held in with a flathead screw or flathead screwdriver to remove it. Gross. And then you need a very small screwdriver to get in there to get the idle jet out. This is an 1/8 inch flathead screwdriver. Should be fine to get this out. This is the most common problem. This little tiny jet right here. Because of how small it is on this engine, the opening in the jet is so tiny that any bit of residue will clog that up. Ethanol, fuel, oil, anything will get in there and just gunk it up and won't allow gas to get into the engine. And the reason that we're taking it out when cleaning the carburetor, even though we're soaking it in here, I want to take it out of the body so that that passageway is open from both sides and the jet isn't causing any problem. It allows it for a better cleaning all the way through. The best thing you can do is get an ultrasonic cleaner, but I've been working on carburetors for 20 years and I've never used an ultrasonic cleaner, and it's usually okay. This is my go-to. This is what I've been using for 5 years or so, just gunk parts cleaner. It's got a nice little basket in it, so I'll drop the carb body in. Now that the jets and stuff are out, I will take the 2 jets that I took out, put it in the bin as well, and the bowl. I will let that soak. Let's go enjoy a cold beverage. I did mention wanting to clean the main needle too, the top of the carburetor. I put some of the parts cleaner on the paper towel. I'm just going to go at this and kind of scrub the needle until that residue line goes away. You will be able to feel it because it'll be kind of bumpy. Once it's gone, it'll smooth right out, and that's what we want. The time has come to check the parts. So with the small ones like the jets, what I'm going to do now that they've soaked for a little bit, I'm going to use my air compressor and a nozzle and blow some air through it and try to knock out anything that's in those passageways. When you can see light through it, that's a good sign. Here, let's see. Yep, there we go. See? Straight through it. Now we're going to blast through all these passageways. If you're doing this with a big air compressor, be very careful. Don't spray in anything that's going to blast back at your eyes. That was loud. Towel, I need towel. And a rubber chicken. It's looking a lot better. A lot less residue. I'll show you on here. So this inlet initially had all that gunk and stuff on it. Now that's all gone, it's nice and smooth, and none of the passageways are clogged. I'm going to try to wipe all that out because there is still some residue on it, but generally speaking, this is a lot better than it was. One thing to add on this too is that you do not need to replace a carburetor if it's not working properly. Most of the times carburetors can be serviced with just a little bit of tools, some carb cleaner, and some time. I want to make sure that you don't have to just go to Amazon and buy some cheap knockoff carburetor. You can actually do the work yourself, hopefully get the bike running without having to throw new parts at it. Now we can reassemble. Main jet goes in the big hole, pilot jet goes in the little hole. Threads down. These are brass. These are very soft. Do not crank these down. You do not need to go in there and put 100 foot-pounds of torque on them. Just snug is fine. For the float valve, you've got a little notch that sits inside of. That way you can get that into the main inlet, drop it down together, and then you can put that pin back in. Should just slide back in. Make sure you get it all the way in. Don't have it sticking out because it will come in the way of the gasket. You got to make sure it's flush with both sides. Now we put the gasket back on and reinstall the bowl. 4 Phillips head screws. Again, do not crank these down super tight. Do not use a drill. Do not use an impact. It is a good idea though to snug them up one at a time before you really go back and torque it. Once you get them snug, then you can apply torque, and it's best to kind of skip around. Don't over tighten one without tightening the others. The rubber gasket, again, flat side goes down first. Plastic spacer goes in. The drain hose back on. Something to note too, while I was off camera, I added the brass nipple back on. We've got the 2 screws, one for the throttle. So this controls the height of the slide itself. Air idle goes on this side. Main throttle idle adjustment goes in the middle. I'm going to check on the service manual to see what these settings are from all the way in, to see how many turns out they're supposed to be. And then as I get the bike running, then I'll adjust it more all the way in until it stops. For now, I'm going to set it at 2 turns out because that is pretty standard. I'm not sure where to set the idle at yet, so we'll get to that when we get back on the bike. This is good to go back on the bike. Let's start with the oil line because that was the last thing I took off, so I want to make sure it's the first thing I put back on. Gotta flip it around a little bit. Slide in the choke. There is a groove in the slide right here, so take note of that. That goes opposite the adjustment screw. Can only go in one way, so if it doesn't go in, try twisting it a little bit until it drops in place. Let's thread the screw back on top. Almost forgot the little clip on the oil line. Fuel line back on. Clamp on that back on. Make sure you get that rubber boot all the way around the carburetor. Otherwise you'll have a leak. Alright, so it's back on. What I'd like to do is try to start it now. Make sure I can get it to at least start and run, and I can tweak the air idle and the idle adjustment. But let's get it to a point where we can get it start. If that wasn't the problem, then it won't start, but I'm pretty confident that it will start. Start is on, fuel is on, throttle works. Let's do choke on too. Let's try messing with the air idle just a little bit. I'm going to turn it in a half a turn. I heard a sputter. Let's go one more turn, or one more half turn in. We have our test rider Calyx on the 50, waving. How's it running? Good? He's a little trepidatious.
What?
Said you're a little trepidatious.
What's that mean?
Cautious.
Yes.
The PW is back up and running. My son ripped it up and down the street a little bit, make sure it's running well for the kid. So now we can get this back to my buddy, get his kid back on the track, hopefully having more fun. If you have a PW50 and your bike wasn't starting, hopefully this Carb Clean helps you too. Good luck out there, have fun, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.